Mark was the kind of person everyone admired from the outside. He woke up before sunrise, laced up his shoes, and ran while the city was still asleep. His notebooks were filled with plans, his walls covered with quotes about hard work and success. People called him disciplined, determined, unstoppable. And maybe he was, but if you looked closely behind that fire in his eyes, there was also a quiet exhaustion, a shadow that grew darker the more he pushed himself. Because here's the truth no one talks about. Motivation can be a double-edged sword. The same fire that lights up your path can also burn you from within. We grow up hearing that motivation is everything, that if you want to achieve greatness, you just need to push harder, work longer, sacrifice more, and for a while it feels good. You feel alive, you feel like you're climbing, but somewhere along the way that same drive can start to consume you. Mark didn't notice it at first. All he saw was progress. But slowly his life began to revolve around this endless chase, where every achievement was quickly overshadowed by the next goal. No matter how much he accomplished, it never felt enough. And this is where the dark side of motivation begins. See, motivation feels like fuel, but unlike fuel, it doesn't burn clean. It leaves behind residue, pressure, guilt, anxiety. Every time you achieve something, instead of resting, you think, what's next? What if I lose this momentum? What if I fall behind? That voice gets louder, and soon, the very thing that once gave you energy becomes the thing that drains it. Psychologists have studied this pattern. There's even a term for it, the hedonic treadmill. The idea that no matter how much we achieve, we quickly return to a baseline level of satisfaction, always wanting more. It's like running on a treadmill that never stops. You move faster and faster, but you don't actually get closer to lasting contentment. Mark was on that treadmill without realizing it. He thought he was chasing success, but really, success was chasing him, demanding more, asking for bigger sacrifices each time. And here's where it gets even more dangerous. Motivation has this way of making us blind to balance. You skip rest because winners don't sleep. You neglect relationships because grind now, shine later. You sacrifice your mental health because pain is temporary. Society even praises this behavior. We glorify the hustle. We post motivational quotes. We admire people who never stop, but we rarely ask, at what cost? Think about it. How many times have you forced yourself to keep going, not because you wanted to, but because you felt you had to? How many times have you beaten yourself up for not being motivated enough? As if being human wasn't already hard enough? This is the dark side, when motivation becomes less about growth and more about survival, less about passion and more about pressure. Now, let's go deeper. Motivation often disguises itself as freedom, but it can actually trap us. Mark believed he was in control of his journey, but slowly, the journey began to control him. If he rested, he felt guilty. If he slowed down, he felt lazy. If he failed, he felt worthless. The truth is, motivation is not always about moving towards something. Sometimes it's about running away, from fear, from insecurity, from that quiet voice that whispers, "You're not enough." And here's the paradox. Motivation often starts from a pure place. A dream, a vision, a desire to improve, but left unchecked, it can become toxic. It convinces you that your worth is measured by output, that you are only as good as your latest achievement, that slowing down means falling behind. This isn't growth, this is self-imposed imprisonment. Studies show that over-motivation can lead to burnout, a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress. And burnout doesn't just steal your energy, it steals your joy. You might reach the top of the mountain only to realize you're too tired to enjoy the view. Mark started noticing this. He would hit milestones he once dreamed of, but instead of feeling proud, he felt empty. He thought he just needed more motivation, but what he really needed was something entirely different. This brings us to an uncomfortable truth. Motivation is not sustainable. It was never meant to be. Motivation is like a spark. It ignites, but it cannot keep burning forever. What keeps you moving isn't motivation alone. It's discipline, balance, and a deeper sense of purpose. Yet, we keep chasing motivation as if it's the answer to everything, and that chase itself becomes the trap. But here's a question that might shift your perspective. What if constant motivation is actually overrated? What if the secret to a meaningful life isn't always running forward, but sometimes allowing yourself to stand still? Think about the moments you've grown the most. Were they always during times of high motivation, or were they sometimes in the quiet, in the pause, in the reflection after failure? The dark side of motivation is that it tricks us into believing that slowing down equals losing. But in reality, slowing down is sometimes the only way to truly see where you're going. Mark had to learn this the hard way. One morning, he woke up and realized he didn't even know why he was running anymore. The goals that once inspired him now felt like chains. The fire that once guided him now burned him. And that's when he began to ask the questions we all eventually face. What am I chasing? Who am I doing this for? And at what cost? This is where the story takes a turn, because buried inside the dark side of motivation lies a deeper lesson. A lesson about self-awareness, about balance, about redefining what success really means. And this is the part most people miss. We think the answer is always more drive, more energy, more hustle. But sometimes the real answer is less pressure, less guilt, less comparison. But what does that look like? How do you find balance in a world that tells you to keep pushing, keep grinding, keep striving for more? And is it possible to use motivation without letting it control you? The answer is yes, but it requires a shift, a different way of thinking, one that isn't as popular but is far more sustainable. And that's what we'll explore next. The hidden truths about motivation that no one talks about, and the surprising ways you can protect yourself from its darker side while still growing, still striving, and still finding meaning. So here's where it gets interesting. When psychologists studied motivation, they discovered something revealing. Not all motivation is created equal. There are actually two main types, intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic motivation comes from within. It's when you do something because you genuinely love it, because it fulfills you, because it aligns with who you are. Extrinsic motivation, on the other hand, comes from outside. Rewards, recognition, status, validation. And while both can drive us, the dark side often emerges when extrinsic motivation takes over. Think about Mark again. When he first started running before dawn, it wasn't to impress anyone. It was because he felt alive. It was because he wanted to feel stronger, healthier, freer. That was intrinsic, but as time went on, as people praised his discipline, as he posted progress online, as expectations grew, that inner spark was slowly replaced by outside pressure. He wasn't running because he loved it anymore. He was running because he feared what it would mean if he stopped. And that shift from joy to obligation is where motivation begins to lose its purity. And this doesn't just happen to Mark, it happens to all of us. Maybe you loved painting, but once it became about likes and followers, it started to feel heavy. Maybe you studied hard because you were curious, but when it became about grades and rankings, it became stressful. This is one of the most common traps of motivation, when the thing you once loved becomes a burden, because it's no longer about the process, it's about the outcome. But here's the irony. The more we chase outcomes, the less we enjoy the journey. And when the journey becomes hollow, even reaching the destination feels empty. This is why so many high achievers feel unfulfilled. They get the promotion, the award, the applause, but then they ask themselves, why don't I feel the way I thought I would? Because the external reward can never fully replace the internal joy. Another hidden danger of motivation is comparison. Motivation often feeds off competition. You see someone doing more, achieving more, and suddenly you feel behind. It's like social media. You scroll, and instead of feeling inspired, you feel inadequate. And that's not by accident. Psychologists call this social comparison theory. We measure ourselves against others, and our motivation often rises or falls depending on where we think we stand. But the problem is, it's a never-ending cycle. No matter how much you do, there will always be someone doing more. And if your worth is tied to outpacing others, you'll never truly feel at peace. Now let's pause for a moment and ask the deeper question. Why do we chase motivation so relentlessly in the first place? Perhaps it's because we fear stillness. Because in stillness, we are forced to face ourselves, without distractions, without goals to hide behind. Maybe motivation is sometimes less about growth and more about escape. Escape from our doubts, our insecurities, our fear of being ordinary. And that's the paradox. We chase motivation to feel more alive, but sometimes it distances us from the very life we are trying to live. Mark eventually realized this. One evening, after months of relentless pushing, he sat down and felt nothing. No excitement, no joy, no energy, just emptiness. And for the first time, he questioned not just his goals, but the very way he was living. Was he really alive, or was he just running on autopilot, powered by motivation that had turned into fear? This realization can be terrifying, but it can also be liberating. Because once you see the dark side of motivation, you begin to understand that the answer isn't to abandon drive altogether, but to transform it, to move from chasing to choosing, to shift from pressure to purpose. So what does this transformation look like? First, it requires redefining success. Instead of asking, what can I achieve? Start asking, what feels meaningful? What nourishes me? Success doesn't always have to mean climbing higher. Sometimes success is being present. Sometimes it's saying no. Sometimes it's allowing yourself to rest without guilt. Second, it means reconnecting with intrinsic motivation. Remember why you started. Strip away the noise of recognition and validation, and return to the joy of the process. If you loved writing before it became about likes, write for yourself again. If you loved running before it became about metrics, run without a watch. When you reconnect with the intrinsic, you reclaim the purity of motivation. Third, it means embracing balance. Motivation pushes us forward, but balance keeps us whole. Rest is not weakness, it's part of the rhythm of growth. Think about music. It's not just the notes that make the song, but also the pauses in between. Life works the same way. Without pause, there is no harmony. And finally, it means learning to live without constant motivation. Because the truth is, you don't need to be motivated all the time to create a meaningful life. What you need is consistency, discipline, and purpose. Those are quieter forces, less glamorous than motivation, but infinitely more sustainable. Motivation is a spark, but discipline is the steady flame that carries you through the dark. Mark learned this too. He stopped asking, how can I push harder? And started asking, how can I live better? He still chased goals, but not at the cost of his well-being. He still worked hard, but he also allowed himself to rest. He discovered that life wasn't meant to be an endless sprint, but a series of rhythms, effort and ease, striving and stillness, fire and calm. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. The dark side of motivation is real, but it's not the end of the story. It's an invitation to go deeper, to stop confusing movement with progress, to stop measuring worth by productivity, to stop believing that more is always better. The real secret is not to be endlessly motivated, but to be meaningfully alive. So the next time you feel unmotivated, instead of punishing yourself, pause and listen. Maybe your mind and body are telling you something important. Maybe rest is not the enemy, but the teacher. Maybe your worth has never been tied to how much you can produce. And here's the beautiful paradox. When you stop obsessing over motivation, when you stop forcing yourself to always feel driven, you actually make room for something deeper than motivation, fulfillment. Because fulfillment doesn't rely on constant fire. Fulfillment is quieter, it's steadier. It's the gentle knowing that you are enough, even when you're not sprinting. Mark discovered that his greatest growth didn't come from endless chasing. It came when he allowed himself to slow down, to breathe, to live with intention instead of pressure. And maybe that's the lesson we all need. Motivation can push you, but it can also blind you. It can ignite you, but it can also consume you. The challenge is not to reject it, but to hold it lightly, to use it without becoming used by it. In the end, the question isn't, how do I stay motivated forever? The question is, how do I create a life that matters even when motivation fades? Because motivation will fade, but purpose, presence, and peace, those can last. And maybe that's where true success begins, not in the endless chase for more, but in the quiet realization that you are already enough, here, now.